Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
It's good to be back. I've been gone for a couple weeks. Alicia and I did a little traveling. We did some training for work. And then once your vacation ends, then you got to catch up on everything at home and work. And it seemed like as soon as I got back from vacation, my boss left for vacation. I think his vacation was a little bit more fun than mine because he was gone for 10 days instead of 5. And he wasn't in training on his vacation, so it's been a rough couple weeks. I'm glad to be back. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of prayer requests, and we do need to be praying for our brothers and sisters and their family members. And it's rough when family members are going through stuff, and we need to encourage them, like Debbie was saying, give them good words of encouragement, lift them up. And as Christians, we should be willing to help out families and extend love and comfort and help these families out that are going through these trying times. So, this morning I'm going to be speaking to you probably out of all 4 Gospels. This is scripture that I've spoke on. I know I've spoke on this to the youth before because it speaks of a young lad. And I may have mentioned it here, but this scripture really came to light a couple weeks ago when we watched that video on the Samaritan's Purse, the Operation Christmas Child, and about how giving just a little bit can change, whether it be a life or may it be many lives. And you know, I look back at how God has blessed Alicia and I and the kids over the years since we've got saved, and I've shared before there was times where we didn't think we were going to be able to pay our bills, and God provided. And it was because people gave and helped. So this morning we're going to be looking at, like I said, I'm probably going to read a little bit from all 4 Gospels, but we're going to concentrate on Matthew chapter 14. And we're going to look at verses 13 through 21. As I was preparing for this, and I'm still wondering if I should read from all 4 Gospels or not, but all 4 Gospels are written a little different on this particular one. And they all touch it in different aspects, and that's the point I'm trying to get at, because each one writes it a different way and touches on it a different way. Reading from Matthew 14, verse 13, it says, "When Jesus heard it, he departed from there by boat to a deserted place by himself. When the multitudes heard it, they followed him on foot from the cities. And when Jesus went out, he saw a great multitude, and he was moved with compassion for them, and healed their sick. When it was evening, his disciples came to him, saying, 'This is a deserted place, and the hour is already late. Send the multitudes away, that they may go into the villages and buy themselves food.' But Jesus said to them, 'They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat.' And they said to him, 'We have here only 5 loaves and 2 fish.' He said, 'Bring them here to me.' Then he commanded the multitudes to sit down on the grass. And he took the 5 loaves and 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he blessed and broke it, and gave the loaves to the disciples, and the disciples gave to the multitudes. So they all ate and were filled, and they took up 12 baskets full of the fragments that remained. Now those who had eaten were about 5,000 men, besides women and children." If you were to look through the Gospel, some of them are titled "Feeding the 5,000." Let's look at Mark chapter 6, verse 32. Verse 32 starts off by saying, "So they departed to a deserted place in the boat by themselves. But the multitude saw them departing, and many knew him, and ran there on foot from all the cities. They arrived before them and came together to him. And Jesus, when he came out, saw a great multitude and was moved with compassion for them, because they were like sheep, not having any shepherd. So he began to teach them many things. When the day was now far spent, his disciples came to him and said, "This is a deserted place, and already the hour is late. Send them away, that they may go into the surrounding country and villages, and buy themselves bread, for they have nothing to eat." But he answered and said to them, "You give them something to eat." And they said to him, "Shall we go buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give them something to eat?" But he said to them, "How many loaves do you have? Go and see." And when they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then he commanded them to make them all sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in ranks in hundreds and in fifties. And when he had taken the 5 loaves and 2 fish, he looked up to heaven, blessed it, broke the loaves, and gave them to his disciples to set before them, and the 2 fish he divided among them all. So they all ate and were filled. And they took up 12 baskets full of fragments and of the fish. Now those who had eaten loaves were about 5,000 men. I'm sorry, but 5 loaves and 2 fish isn't going to feed Tristan, let alone 5,000. So this is definitely a miracle. Let's flip over to Luke real quick, chapter 9. Tristan eats that for a snack in between shovelfuls of dirt.
See, that'd just be a snack for me.
We're going to Luke chapter 9, and we're going to look at verses 10 through 17. Actually, let's start in verse 11. When the multitudes knew it, they followed him, and he received them and spoke to them about the kingdom of God and healed those who had need of healing. When the day became to wear away, the 12 came and said to him, "Send the multitude away, that they go into surrounding towns and country and lodge and get provisions, for we are in a deserted place." But he said to them, "You give them something to eat." And they said, "We have no more than 5 loaves and 2 fish, unless we go and buy food for all these people." For there were about 5,000 men. Then he said to his disciples, "Make them sit down in groups of 50. And they did so, and made them all sit down. Then he took the 5 loaves and 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he blessed and broke them, and gave them to the disciples to set them before the multitude. So they all ate and were filled, and 12 baskets of leftover fragments were taken up by them. Last one we're going to look at is John, and I mentioned the young lad earlier, and John is the only one that speaks of the young lad, and that's one of my main points today. So let's look at John chapter 6, and we're going to read verses 1 through 13. It says, "After these things, Jesus went over the Sea of Galilee, which is in the Sea of Tiberias. Then a great multitude followed him, because they saw his signs which he had performed on those who were diseased. And Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat with his disciples. Now the Passover feast of the Jews was near. Then Jesus lifted up his eyes, and seeing a great multitude coming toward him, he said to Philip, 'Where shall we buy bread, that these may eat?' But this he said to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may have a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, 'There is a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish. But what are they among so many?' Then Jesus said, 'Make the people sit down.' Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down in number about 5,000. And Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to the disciples, and the disciples to those sitting down, and likewise of the fish, as much as they wanted. So when they were filled, he said to the disciples, 'Gather up the fragment that remains, so that nothing is lost.' Therefore they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of 5 barley loaves, which were left over by these who had eaten." Now we read it over and over again, if there was only 5 barley loaves, or 5 5 loaves and 2 fish. I won't add the barley because that wasn't in all the translations. And this is a scripture that it's stuck with me for many years. And we can learn some life-changing lessons from this scripture. The first one I want to look at is the compassion lesson that we can learn. Jesus cares about all of our needs. It sees here, if we went further ahead, or back I should say, in Matthew 14, this is, what is it? In verse 8 it says, "So she, having been prompted by her mother, said, Give me John the Baptist's head here on a platter. And the king was sorry, nevertheless, because those who sat with him, he commanded it to be given to her." John the Baptist had just been executed here. And Jesus wanted to get away. And when he got away, he saw these multitudes following him. And he treated them with compassion. How many times do we encounter things and we don't want to do anything but dwell on our own pity party, let alone treat people with compassion? My daughter posted something on Facebook yesterday where she was, I forget even where she said she was at. A gentleman opened a door for this lady that was leaving and told her to have a nice day, and the lady turned around and looked at him like he had just told her to go fly a kite. It was mean to her. No compassion, no love, no nothing there. We have to remember that we have to treat people with compassion, just as Jesus did here to the multitudes. He could have said, "Go away, I want to be left alone." He could have said, "Go away, I want to pray." But no, he's seen the multitudes come, and he was worried about their needs. And it states right in the beginning, in 14, it says, "And when Jesus went out, he saw a great multitude, and he moved with compassion for them, and he healed their sick." He fed the people spiritual truth. He sat around and told them parables of things in the kingdom. You and I have spiritual needs, and Jesus meets those needs all the time. We all have physical needs as well. I shared earlier that there's been times where Alicia and I didn't know how we were going to feed our kids, didn't know if we were going to have a roof over our head or anything like that. And Jesus met those needs. I keep wanting to jump ahead here. You know, I mentioned here that Jesus meets our spiritual needs and our physical needs. But he's interested in every area of our life. Every area of our life. Number 2 that I want to look at is the faith lesson that we can get from this. How many times do we think that God asks us to do something that's impossible just to test us? And I'm not going to go too in depth into this because this is going to tie into tonight's message. But there are many times that I can think back and felt like God's wanted me to do something. And I think, no, that's impossible. I can't do that. But he's wanted us to take that step of faith. You know, just after we read about the feeding of the 5,000 here, this is where later on in chapter 14, verse 28, is where I always pick on Peter, because Jesus commanded him to come across the water, and Peter started to sink, and Jesus said, "Oh, you have little faith," because he lost his faith. He didn't have faith. The disciples came to Jesus in this scripture and said, "Send the people away to the villages so that they can buy food." And what did Jesus say? He turned right around and said, "No, you will feed them." Jesus told his disciples there to do something impossible. I've read you all four Gospels, and I'm sure everyone's read them before, but they all argued. They all wanted to say, no, send them away, and Jesus kept saying, no, you're going to do it. And I'm sure they were standing there saying, I got 5 loaves and 2 fish. This is impossible to feed 5,000. Here's a scale for you, here's a scale for you. I mean, if you were to look at it, if you were in their shoes, you would think it is impossible. But God asks us all the time to do things. And it's our lack of faith that is the only thing that makes it impossible. I referenced John earlier. Let's turn back to John chapter 6 real quick. Because it's stated right in here. I can find it now. It says, Jesus lifted up his eyes and seeing a great multitude coming toward him, he said to Philip, where shall we buy bread that we may eat? But this he said to test him. Because right after that it says, for he himself knew what he would do. He tested him by asking him. Just as we get tested by so many things. The disciples were probably thinking at this point that their main problem was a lack of food, and it wasn't, it was a lack of faith. You know, I can remember back in school, the dreaded Fridays. You walk into class and a teacher would tell you, and this is my early years in school, so I'm sure there's going to be some comments from my kids on this, but the teacher would say, clear off your desk except for everything except a blank piece of paper and a pen. And that was the days that we'd have a spelling test. And I'm sure my kids will tell me, no, it wasn't paper and pen, it was stone tablets and chisels, but still, you walk into class, you sit down, and teacher tell you to take off everything off your desk, this blank piece of paper and a pen, and you're getting ready for a spelling test. And how you did on the spelling test was determined by how prepared you were. How many times in your life do you think God has given you a blank piece of paper? And the outcome of that is where your faith stands. It's how prepared you are. Because trust me, back in school, there wasn't much preparation for me. I wasn't very prepared. But how many times through life does God give us a blank piece of paper? When you face the hardest times in your lives, it's like God has given you that blank piece of paper. Where is your faith? How well are you going to do on this? You know, I don't mean to disclose phone conversations, and I'm sure Smitty won't mind. He called me yesterday morning asking me for prayer for his son. Smitty wasn't putting his faith in me, Smitty was putting his faith in God. That's where Smitty's faith lies, is in God. He was just reaching out, and I'm going to get into that a little later in the sermon. He was reaching out. And as soon as I hung up with Smitty, I prayed. Smitty's faith was in God at that point when he asked for prayer. His faith wasn't in a doctor's. His faith wasn't in my prayer. His faith was in God. And that's where our faith should lie. I got corrected this morning on the date of almost surgery. God knows what's going to happen. We put our faith in God that everything's going to come out okay. It doesn't matter what day it is. Cody's mother is struggling with some stuff right now in Vincent's. I'm sure Cody's putting his faith in God. Not in the doctors, but in God. You talk about someone that's had a transformation in life, it's Cody. Cody put his faith in God years ago, and God has transformed him. That's where our faith should be. So the next time you're given a blank piece of paper, or feel like you're taking a test, where are you going to put your faith? You know, I've told my youth for many years, you can listen to your youth pastors, you can listen to your pastors, you can listen to your parents. But you need to listen to what God is telling you. You need to put your faith in Him. My daughter used to worry so much about what people in school thought about her. And I can't even fathom the times my wife has told her, don't worry about what your friends think about you, worry about what God thinks about you. When God gives you that blank piece of paper, He's asking you, do you trust Him? Are you putting all your faith in Him? A lot of times your faith will be tested continually throughout your life, not to shame you, but to strengthen you. Everything that we go through is to strengthen us. I didn't give Lauren this scripture. Lauren, let's look at James chapter 1, verses 2 and 3 real quick. That was it. Yep. My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. Third point I want to look at this morning is the abundance lesson. We look back at, Lauren's going to hate me if I get into this message. We look back at verse 14, or I'm sorry, we look back at chapter 14. It states in here that we only have, oh right here, verse 17. And they said to him, we have here only 5 loaves and 2 fish. Only. God doesn't understand onlys. Not at all. When you say we have only, you have just put our God in a box. And that's where we're going to come up with the abundance at. Because the disciples said, we have here only 5 loaves and 2 fish. And what did Jesus reply to them? Bring them to me. Bring them to me. Like I said, they used the only word. It was like Jesus didn't understand it. Because to them, they said, we have only 5 and 2. And Jesus said, bring it to me. He was basically saying that your only is enough for me to make plenty. Just like I mentioned this morning, the Operation Christmas Child, the boxes. That little bit that we give, you don't understand how that can bless somebody. And we think it's something so small, but to other people it's so huge. And it's because Jesus multiplies it. And I mentioned earlier that of the 4 Gospels, John was the only one that mentioned where the loaves and the fish came from. And John tells us that Andrew brought this unnamed lad, and he had 5 little buns and 2 small fish. For a young lad, we're talking about basically a Happy Meal. This is a young boy who's sent out, who was probably given enough for a young man to eat. But he had faith in Jesus because what he had, he surrendered to him. He didn't know what would happen, but he decided to trust Jesus with his food. That's what faith is. We don't know what's going to happen with stuff that we give God, but we trust. We trust that when those, and I keep using the shoe boxes just because it's something that we're on right now, but we trust that those are going to get to somebody's hands, some little child's hands, and they're going to bless them. We don't know exactly what's going to happen, but we're still willing to trust God. You know, there's a lot of stuff that I want to say, but it's going to jump into tonight's message, but I will share a little bit of it. You know, 2008, Alicia and I came out here for a visit so she could be reunited with her sister she hadn't seen in 20 years. And over a course of a couple months, while we were here, we felt the urge to move here and get into ministry. But over a couple of months, there was a lot of doubt. Because we both left good jobs. We left a beautiful house. We put everything we owned into storage. And we came out here basically with the clothes on our back. That is probably the biggest step of faith that I've ever had to take. But I have seen so much come out of it. And there's sometimes I sit and I ask myself, what would happen if I would have stayed in Michigan? Over the years, I've seen many youth get led to the Lord. I've seen many youth go home and lead their parents to the Lord. Those are all things that have happened because we took a step of faith. And it's not that we're better than anybody else. Because tonight, and I'll give you a homework assignment, tonight I'm going to be asking each one of you that are here what step of faith you have taken. What has God put in front of you when He's given you a blank piece of paper? And I want you to think about that today. Because there's a lot of times we don't think about things like that. This young lad gave 5 loaves and 2 fish. Enough food, like I said, a Happy Meal basically. What do you think the expression on his face was when he saw God turn from a Happy Meal and supersized it? He just took one person's food and fed thousands. Granted, it always says 5,000, but if you read the scripture, it says 5,000 men and with their women and children. So there was more than 5,000 there. He multiplied it. He took an only and made it plenty. He kept saying that Jesus distributed it to the disciples, and the disciples handed it out. And when they were done, there was leftovers. There was baskets. You didn't see in there where Jesus multiplied it and the disciples ate, and then they passed it on. What you read is Jesus multiplied it, handed it out to the disciples passed it out, and then I'm sure there was enough for them. They were worried about serving others instead of serving themselves. Last scripture, Lauren, I promise you, Ephesians chapter 3, verse 20. This is another one I didn't give her. But she's quick, she'll get to it, see? She got to it before I can even turn to Ephesians. Now to him who is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think according to the power that works in us. Who is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask. Jesus did 4 simple things when he received the 5 loaves and 2 fish. First one was he looked to heaven. Second one was he gave thanks, which is something that we should do every day. He broke the bread and then he distributed it. If you want your only to be transformed into God's overabundance, you should also be doing these 4 things. It doesn't matter if you think it's small. Give it to God. He'll multiply it. We should look to heaven for help. We should give thanks for the little that we have. We should cherish the value of brokenness. And we should serve others before ourselves. Helen?